Hello and welcome along to another Panto podcast. Today we meet Gareth Joyner, who's quite the newbie, shall I say, in the world of Panto. He's only done 3, but he's also a well-known character performer. The character he's possibly most famous for is a lady by the name of Myra Dubois. This podcast does contain some dark humour, shall I say. So, whilst not rude and certainly not explicit, but some of the listening may be of a more adult nature, so discretion is advised. Also, to let you know about the British Pantomime Awards that are taking place on the 28th of April 2019 at the New Wimbledon Theatre. It's just been announced that Christopher Biggins is going to be the host, once again for the 3rd year running, and tickets are now available to buy on the website. Just go to pantomimeawards.co.uk and you'll find all the details there. So thank you very much for downloading, and please enjoy Gareth Joyner. Welcome along to the Panto podcast. I'm joined today with Gareth Joyner. Hello.
Hiya. That's really weird because we've been talking for about 20 minutes already and now we're trying to stage the beginning of the conversation.
We'll do that. For our listeners. Yes, we've never met before, have we?
No.
How did it all begin then for you?
How did what begin? Myra or Panto?
Well, we'll start with Panto and we'll go into Myra.
All right. Well, I'm a relative baby, so I've listened to the three podcasts you've put out. And at the time of recording, and you've got like Beric Kayler, who's celebrating 40 years at the York Theatre Royal. You have Billy Pearce, he's doing 20 years at the Alhambra. I've done 3 years, so I'm positively fetal in comparison to these other people. But I started pantomime 3 years ago for PHA. I appeared as an ugly. Well, actually, no. It depends how you want to frame it. So my first professional mainstream family pantomime in a theatre was 3 years ago. And I played an ugly sister in Cinderella. I believe I was Cheryl Hardup or some sort of X Factor person, alongside my friend Stephen Richards, who appears on the drag circuit as Lola Lasagna. And that's a great name, isn't it?
Isn't it?
It's an old Bat villain from the Adam West series. There was a villain called Lola Lasagna who was played by Ethel Merman, and she was the cousin of the Penguin. Yeah, she had.
Did it get any camper?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So my friend Stephen just stole that name for a drag name when he started doing drag. So me and Stephen appeared as ugly sisters together at the Harlequin Theatre in Redhill with Chesney Hawkes as Prince Charming, Abigail Welford as Cinderella, Neil Wheatley as Buttons. Simon Bashford was the fairy godmother, because Simon Bashford is the resident dame at the Harlequin. But when it came to Cinderella, of course, Cinderella doesn't have a dame, and Simon. I think there was some talk that Simon and Neil might have done uglies, but then it was decided that Simon would play the fairy godmother, and then 2 uglies were drafted in. And my friend Stephen had played ugly sister for 3 years previous to that, and he had. He was talking to me conversationally at the 2 Brewers in Clapham in the dressing room, and he said, "Oh, I've got to pick my sister for next year," and I just said, looked at him dead straight and went, "Oh, I want to do it." And he was like, "Well, I'll speak to Paul," because this was for PHA, Paul Holman. He was like, "I'll speak to Paul and see what they think." And I was like, "Okay, great, but I want to do it." Because I've loved pantomime ever since I was the time. Like my first memory of pantomime is being in the theatre at the Rotherham Civic Theatre. It would have been. I can't tell you what year it was. It would be somewhere in the early 90s. So I'm 31, so it would have been in the very early 90s. And I remember Widow Twankey on stage, and her laundrette was like a push-on one, like a supermarket stall, and it had. I remember the soap studs and everything. I just remember Twanky walking on stage. That's all I can remember. I can't remember anything else. But just as a burnt into the retina of my memory, I can remember this, and I've loved it ever since. And I've seen at least. I used to see 1 pantomime every year as a child growing up. And then when I started to sort of gain a bit more independence and a bit more of an income, I started to see more, so I said to Stephen, I want to do a pantomime. And by this point, I'd been doing my cabaret character, Myra Dubois, who she turned 10 this year. So I've been working as Myra for 10 years. and pantomime's always been on my radar. I've always wanted to do pantomime, and I've actually written. I used to write adult pantomimes for the Royal Vauxhall Tavern, which is known for Savage worked there, Lily Savage worked there, but before Savage, Shufflewick worked there, Mrs. Shufflewick, and Hinge and Brackett started at the tavern as well. So it's well known in the right. I was at the Edinburgh Fringe this year, and I was talking to a comedy promoter, and he said, "Where do you work in London then?" And I said, "Oh, I work at the Royal Vauxhall Tavern. Do you know it?" And he went, "Oh yes, by reputation." So, and I wrote the RVT do a Christmas panto every year, but of course it's an adult panto, and I wrote four of those. I wrote four of them. And then I wrote one for the Two Brewers in Clapham, and then I wrote one for Camden last year. So I've written writing adult pantos has been a thing that I've always done, and then when this opportunity came up to sort of go into mainstream panto, I kind of really pushed for it, and it worked as well because me and Stephen are friends, and so that was great. And then what happened during that run, me and Stephen were talking about. Oh, we'll do this next year. We'll set ourselves up as a pair of uglies, and we'll go around and everything, and sort of go on the circuit. And then there was, but towards the end of it, Stephen was off ill one day. He had a knee injury and a terrible cold, and a number of things. And eventually he phoned up and he went, "I've got to take today off. They're gonna have to send on an understudy with you." And I can't think of anything I'd like to do less than perform comedy to someone that's reading a script off a clipboard. So I said to the stage manager, "Oh, do you mind if I just do this myself? Do you mind if Cinderella just has one sister today?" I said, "I'll make sure everyone gets the cues. I know all of Lola's lines. I'll make sure everyone gets the feeds. They'll not think. I think we had to go over one or two gags and just tidy them up a bit, so they were fine." And they were fine with that. So I went on as myself. And it was like someone had taken the reins off, and I did one of the best shows I've ever done. And afterwards, everyone in the company looked at me and went, "Oh, you're a dame. You're not a sister. You're a dame." And so Matthew Ashford said it to me as well. He was directing it, and John Lyons, is it John Lyons? Yeah, from A Touch of Frost. He was playing Baron Hardup as well. He said it to me as well. So that was great. And after that, I got word got back to Paul and Nick George, who works for PHA, got back to them that I did really well on my own, and so they offered me Dame the next year in Leeds, and I jumped at the chance. And when I did Ugly Sister, I just did it as Gareth Joyner. I didn't do it as Myra, so because I thought I'm playing a role. It's an ugly sister. It's something new. And then when they made me Dame, I said to Nick, "Look, I've got an idea. I know." So I want to do it. I want to play Dame, but I want Myra to play the Dame. So we'll bill her as Myra. Well, in the programme, it said, Dame Trot played by Myra Dubois, and all the blurb in the programme was Myra's life story and Myra's picture and everything like that. And we'll do it. Myra is playing Dame Trot because I've cultivated a fan base over 10 years. I've got quite a big following in London and Manchester. And I said, if you bill me as Myra, you'll probably sell a few tickets, and that's how you talk to producers. You'll say, "Oh, it'll translate into ticket sales, love. You can do what you want as long as it translates into ticket sales." So and we did, and it really worked. And Myra as a character, for your listeners that don't know, she's a very she's an actress who started on the working men's pub and club circuit singing. And she's self-declared as the siren from South Yorkshire because she thinks she has the most wonderful voice in the world, and she very much doesn't. And she's very delusions of grandeur and things like that. And she's got quite a following. And I've done a bit of telly with her and a bit of radio, and so there was something there that I could take and place in the pantomime. So that gave me direction of how I wanted to play Dame. And I played it as Myra, so she was the sort of mother that was liable to give Jack a clip round the back of the ear and then give him a hug. You know what I mean? Sort of rather than a mumsy dame, she was quite. She was a dame that's lived. But she's a widow, and she's had to bring a son up on her own. Well, with Simon, the brother. So I sort of really enjoyed applying this ready-made character to Panto, and it's been done before. I mean, May McFettigue, is it? She plays Panto in character, and I think Norman Lewis did it as Fanny Sidebottom over the garden wall, and Shufflewick did Panto as Shufflewick. So I there's a long tradition of pre-existing comedy characters. Les Dawson as well. He did it as Ada. So So yeah, and it's been fun. And so last year I did my first Dame in Leeds, and it was tremendous. And I really enjoyed translating Myra to a family audience. It really worked. It was really fun because I was partnered with Jez Edwards as he played my son, Simple Simon, and he's celebrating his 10th. He'd be great to interview if you haven't got him on your radar already. He's currently about to celebrate his 10th year in Leeds as comic, and he is so in tune to the children. I learned so much watching Jez and how he's a dad, and he's a devoted dad, and Jez's most important thing is that the children enjoy themselves, which is great. So at the beginning of the Panto, Jez came on and he did his I came on and I did my bit, and I sort of appealed to the mums and dads a bit more, and then Jez came on and appealed to the kids, and it worked so well. It was really joyous, and it was funny because the adult Pantos I've written, there was lots of that I brought into the Panto. So even though when I wrote them, they were performed to a load of drunk gays in a pub on a roundabout, as I affectionately refer to the tavern, these lines worked in a mainstream Panto. So, and we did Jack and the Beanstalk. So I borrowed some of these lines that I'd previously written and put them into the show, and it worked. It was tremendous fun. So I did. So that's my history with mainstream pantomime. Next year I'm off to Hoddesdon, which is in Broxbourne, which is between London and Cambridge. That tends to be the how I have to tell people where it is, because people go, "Where are you doing Panto this year?" "Oh, I'm in Broxbourne." "Where's that?" It's Hoddesdon. Where's Hoddesdon? It's between London and Cambridge. That's it. But I'm there with Dave Benson Phillips. We're doing Dick Whittington, and I'm looking forward to it. And I did a Panto when I was doing amateur dramatics in the 2001. I was in Goldilocks and the Three Bears at the Dinnington Operatic Society, and I played a sugar plum fairy in one scene. So I came on and did a comedy ballet with a load of other people, a load of other men in skirts, and they came off. So I did that Panto, and then wrote the adult ones, and now I've managed to worm my way into adult. I quite like that Myra has a place in pantomime now, because I started doing her in strip clubs. The first ever gig I did Myra at was at Madame Jojo's in Soho on a burlesque night. So she was born into the strip clubs.
How did she go down?
Oh, she went down very well. It was great. There was loads. It was in 2008. Myra made her first appearance on stage, and it was in the middle of a huge burlesque boom, and there was a huge cabaret revival, and there was loads of people doing burlesque acts, which different to stripping, must be said. Stripping is for the titillation of old men in greasy coats. Burlesque is sort of for the empowerment of the performer and the audience. So and Myra was I did an open spot, I suppose you would call the comic spot. I did the comedian spot as Myra, and it went really well. And and after her first gig, they invited me back to host the whole thing. So it went really well. So that was tremendous fun. I've enjoyed finding one of the things that sort of riles me a little bit, because as a long time pantomime enthusiast, I've been going to see them for all my life. So I've tried to see. I started going to see the Panto every year as a child, because it was part of Christmas, and it was always on the coach trip funded by the Wickersley Working Men's Club, which I later went on to Glass Collect at. And we went to the three theatres we went to go and see were the Rotherham Civic Theatre, which was the very affordable local pantomime, which it was produced by Dougie Chapman when I was a kid, and they very rarely had any stars in it. But I remember the Red Riding Hood, I remember that one, which was an odd title to have. That sort of dropped out of popularity. Red Riding Hood, I remember Aladdin, I remember Jack and the Beanstalk there, and they were very Rotherham Civic Theatre is a very small sort of 300 seater, so that was a local pantomime, and then the coach would take us to the much more luxurious pantomimes at the Sheffield Lyceum or the Bradford Alhambra. So, but when I was going to the Bradford Alhambra, it was pre-Pierce, so it was pre-Billy. So it was I think the first panto I can remember at the Alhambra would have been perhaps 1995, and perhaps round about then. But I know Matthew Kelly was Sarah the Cook, and I know the Grumbleweeds were in it. And then I remember the next year we saw Frank Bruno in Jack and the Beanstalk, and I got on stage. I was one of the children that was invited on stage, and I got to sing "One Finger, One Thumb, Keep Moving." And so I've done loads of panto. I'm talking myself down. But so I remember that, and I remember the Sheffield Lyceum. I saw Marty Kane as the Wicked Queen with Bobby Nutt. Bobby Nutt, isn't it? Yeah, Bobby Nutt has recently passed away. And I remember, but this is how vivid panto, like how much of an impression it made on me. I can remember the scene, and I've only been about 5, and I can remember the scene where the huntsman, who was played by Bobby Nutt, was supposed to kill Snow White. And he went, I can't do it. And Snow White goes, why not? And Bobby Nutt went, I've got a rubber knife. And then, wiggled the rubber knife around. I just remember that one very simple gag, and it's like burnt there and never gone away. So I've always been a long-term lover of panto. And then I started to get older, and I started to go and see... I started to go and see panto because I wanted to see what people were doing with it. So I go, the pantos that I love going to see are the Hackney Empire Panto. Do you see the Hackney Empire Panto? Oh, it's absolutely fun. I think what Susan McKenna does over there is wonderful. And I love I've grown to love these pantos. Not more than, I love all panto. Like whether it's the 300 Rotherham Civic Theatre Panto or it is, the Palladium. But like, I love all pantos. And but what I love about the Hackney Empire and the Hammersmith Lyric. I've never seen the one in Stratford. Have you? They do at the Stratford Theatre Royal. They do a panto that's like the independent London pantos, but they tend to go for more of a. I think like they go for titles like Three Little Pigs and things like that, and sometimes it verges more into musical than it is pantomime. They'll often be like, I think once they had 3 dames, and then one year they had no dames, and things like that. So they experiment a bit more. But what I love about the Hackney Empire Panto is that the local community is infused throughout the entire production, and I think that's so important. You get some pantomime scripts, and you can tell that the script you're doing this year in Hull was done in Wolverhampton last year, and the script will say. Aladdin will walk into the cave and the script will say, oh, it's all dark and damp in here, a bit like Name of Local Bar. And what I love about the Hackney Empire one is that it's been moulded from the very rocks of Hackney itself. It's in the scenery, like the Goose Fair with Clive Rowe as Mother Goose. Clive Rowe is a spectacular dame. He's the main reason I went to go and check out the Hackney Panto, because I love watching how different people do dames. And in the Goose Fair, all the stalls in the scenery were reflections of Hackney. There was like a jerk crocodile stall, because obviously there's a huge Caribbean community in Hackney, and I just think that's wonderful. And the same with Hammersmith. The local, I think Jack and the Beanstalk, when they did Jack and the Beanstalk, and the Dame Trot lived in a flat in a high rise. And the beanstalk came out the window box. And that's a very London thing, a London landscape, and that's I absolutely adore that sort of thing. And that's what I would put into the pantos when I wrote them for the Vauxhall Tavern. I would make sure it was all, and it was wonderful doing them, because like at that point I hadn't done I'm trying not to use the word real panto, but you know what I mean by that. A sort of a mainstream family panto, and that it would be so funny watching a pub full of adults drinking pints revert to children the minute the pantomime started. It's behind you as all. And when I wrote them, I was the jokes were adult, but I didn't dick about with the stories. Can I swear? Sorry, I just swore.
That's okay.
Beep it. I didn't mess about with the stories, because so when we did Jack and the Beanstalk, it was the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. There were rude jokes in there, and I always one tradition in my adult pantos has always been who the ghost is for the ghost gag. So when when all of that came out, we had Jimmy Savile as the ghost, and then when Paul Ross was found cruising for gay sex and Drake taking drugs. You can edit this if you want. But when Paul Ross was discovered doing this, we had Paul Ross as the ghost. And then when Jermaine Greer came out with a load of transphobic stuff in the news, we had Jermaine Greer as the ghost. And it's always like a local celebrity that's had their wrist slapped in the news is written in as a guy. You wouldn't get that in a mainstream family panto. Although we've managed this year, we've got the ghost gag. It's on because it's Dick Whittington. We're on the shores of Morocco, and instead of a ghost, we've got a shark and we're singing Baby Shark to get rid of so it's still I love the ghost gag because it's so malleable but yet stays the same. And I think that's a defining thing of Panto. It's malleable, but it stays the same. So if you watched a Panto from 1947 and watched a Panto now, you would recognise it as a pantomime. It would be entirely different, but it's malleable and yet the same. I think that's wonderful. I mean, I'm talking and talking here and not letting you...
You're fine. You're fine.
All right.
Honestly, you're fine.
Because I love that pantomime occupies... you could. Some people listening will probably think I'm over intellectualising it here, but John Bradfield, who writes the pantos for the Above the Stag Theatre in Vauxhall, the hugely successful adult panto that they do down there. Although I prefer the term alternative panto because I think adult panto has very Jim Davidson overtones because of the videos he released in the 90s. But so John Bradfield pointed this out, and it's very true. I'm sort of stealing his point here a little bit, but it's very true that pantomime occupies two realities. There's the reality of the story, and there's the reality of now. So you can go and see Aladdin at the New Wimbledon Theatre this year, and you are in Wimbledon. It is 2018, but it is also ancient Peking. Like, it's both those things at the same time, and I think that's great. So you've got you've got an old Chinese laundress on a mobile phone, and that's absolutely accepted as fact. That's not questioned whatsoever, and I love pantomime for that. I love how silly it is, how self-aware it is, and that's how Myra knows she's in a pantomime. That's how I play her as Dame. She doesn't know. One of the things I don't do, and this is just me, my preference, because you watch a lot of. There's some videos online of dames in the 80s getting ready, and someone's done some documentary. I think it's been mentioned on a podcast already. And Arthur Astley's on there, and he's sort of pointing at the camera saying, a dame should be a fella. You should see the trousers under the skirt. There should be nothing effeminate about a dame. And he's really wagging his finger. And I hate anyone telling you how a dame should be played or how a comic should be played, because wouldn't it be dull if you went to every pantomime in the country and every dame was the same and every comic was the same? So how I like to play Myra as the dame is that she knows she's in a pantomime. She doesn't know she's a man, because Myra doesn't know she's a man. She's played by a man, but that's, Gail Platt doesn't know that she's played by Helen Worth. It's the dramatic of it. So Myra knows she's in a pantomime. I don't have any jokes in there about... There was a joke in... I think there was a joke in this year's script that I asked to be taken out, because it was something like... Sarah the cook, partners off with the villain at the end, and the villain says, "I've got a surprise for you," and Sarah the cook's supposed to go, "Not as big as the surprise I've got for you," and I went, "Oh, how vulgar, a penis, no." So we've changed that, but I liked so Myra. She knows she's in a pantomime. She believes, again, to go alongside the character traits of Myra herself, she believes she is a wonderful singer. She believes she is beautiful. So any jokes about her not being the best at anything, we've had to switch around. So any jokes about Sarah the cook's cooking being awful has to come from the other characters, because she believes that she's wonderful. And also I've opted for I just have the one wig. I keep the look very simple, because Myra's very characterised. She has a certain voice, she has a certain walk, so I don't want to get that lost in a costume that she comes on dressed as a Ferrero Rocher or a can of Coke. So I keep the costumes very simple, and dotted fabric and whatever. It's a pantomime costume. I try and get... Myra wears an awful lot of animal print, so I try and sneak in some animal print to the dame when I can. I don't necessarily have her in the same ripped fishnets that she wears in the clubs, but when we're in Morocco for Dick Whittington, I've got a zebra print belly dancing outfit. I don't know if they do belly dancing in Morocco, but for the sake of the pantomime, it's exotic.
Yes.
So I don't change the wig, and because I think it's nice to have a consistent. I don't. Again, I'm not saying it's wrong when other dames do this, because I think there should be different ways of playing dames. But whenever I see a dame and she's got a purple wig and then a blue wig and then a green wig and then and I just like the children to be able to look at me and know who that is. That's Sarah the cook. She was in the last scene. You know what I mean? I like consistency. So, and that's what I took that from watching dames like Beric. Even though my dame is very different to his dame, and there'll be some people that think Myra's dame is too draggy. I think that there's been some complaints on forums and the internet and things, that dames shouldn't be a drag queen. And Myra isn't a drag queen; she's a character. Myra is a person in her own right. But I know there'll be some people out there that will say that, oh, I prefer it when it's done like Les Dawson or it's done like Beric Kayla. But I'm still very much influenced by those people, even though immediately there's not an immediate likeness between the two. The choice to pick just the one wig was taken from Beric, very much so. So I went to go and see him. I had a day off in because the York Theatre Royal is another one that is like the Hackney Empire. If you cut, to use the cliche, if you cut the York Theatre Royal pantomime in two, it would have York written through it like a Blackpool rock, well, like York rock, because it's just the local area is just infused with it. You could not separate them. And I'd heard about the York pantomime for the longest time, and last year I was up in Leeds and I had a day off. So I took advantage with atrocious toothache. I got an abscess in the middle of the panto on my thing. So I went with an atrocious toothache and a face twice the size that it usually is over to York to go and see the Jack and the Beanstalk, and it was absolutely wonderful. It really was, and I love all the song sheet and the traditions, the throwing the wagon wheels and things like that. I love that. Anything that's observed. Again, you could go and see the York Panto 25 years ago. You could go and see it now. It would be very different, but it would be the York Panto. It's the same, but different. That's definitely a running theme. Would you like to ask a question? Sorry.
Well, I don't have to. You could just keep going.
Honestly, I could rattle on and talk about Panto for years because I recently signed with a new agent. And I don't know if I'm telling this story, I don't mind. I'm very fortunate to share an agent with Vicky Stone, who was nominated for Best Male Villain at the Panto Awards. And she's playing Abenaza again this year in Worthing. And Pete Furman, who is playing Wishy Washy in Wimbledon. We share an agent, Corrie Maguire. And before I signed with Corrie, because I only signed with Corrie in January of this year, before I signed with Corrie, I was talking to Ant Butler at So Comedy, who produced my live shows and tours with Myra, her solo work. So I do an Edinburgh Fringe show every year with Myra, and then we tour it. So I was talking to Ant, and Ant was like, Gareth, you've got to get with an agent. You can't do everything yourself. You need an agent to look after you. We can't do everything, blah, blah, blah. And so he took me for a coffee and went, you need to speak to this person. You need to speak to that person. These are agents I recommend. And then at the end of it, he went, word of advice though, don't approach an agent and say, I want to do pantomime. Like, just do it, but after you've signed, because, pantomime with some agents, it's seen as a bit, it's what someone does at the end of the career, not at the beginning of it. That's what he said to me. And then what made me sign up with Corrie is one of the first conversations we had where Corrie was like, oh, I'll get you a good panto. I was like, brilliant, you're the agent for me then. Because if I could only do the Edinburgh Fringe and Panto every year, I would be a very happy performer. They're the two things I love the most. So I've,
Why do you think people look down their nose at Panto?
I don't know, because Al Murray said this at the Panto Awards, which I went to in February. I snuck along as my agent's +1, and I had the most magical time because everyone was there. Roy Hood won his Lifetime Achievement, and Roy's son Max had been our company manager in Leeds that year, and so it was really nice to see Roy take that after spending Christmas with his son. Do you know Max?
No.
But one of the nicest men in show business. He really is. He's no airs or graces about him. I believe he's a painter and decorator for the rest of the year, and then he does stage managing for a panto. He's in Leeds again this year with Jez. But and it's really fun because I've got Roy's autobiography, A Fart in a Colander, on the shelf over there, and I was reading it. It's Jez does a thing every year at the company meal because so Lola Lasagna, Stephen Richards, who I was sister with, the year before I was Trot at the Leeds Carriage Works Theatre, Stephen was Twanky at the same theatre. So Stephen worked with Jez, and then I worked with Jez. So we were telling each other, comparing notes. And Jez does this game at the company meal where everyone writes down a sordid story about themselves, and you've got to guess who it is. At the Panto Awards. Oh, what were we saying now? Why did I get onto the Panto Awards?
why people look
Al
down
Murray.
their nose,
Al Murray
yeah.
gave a speech, and he said that, you know, in the world that Al's from, the comedy world, pantomime is looked down on, and he said he took that view himself until he did one, and now he can't believe what they're missing out on, because you never stop working on the show, and like even right down it, you know, it was like, you know, the last 3 days of the show when we were still tweaking gags in scene to get them right. Like, because you don't... I've never... Try and use my words. If you work in Panto, I think you have to love it. And I think you have to love it to a degree that you don't find in other areas. I don't think comedians on stage doing stand-up love stand-up comedy as much as much as Panto people love Panto. I don't, because like you're constantly nurturing it, and you know, it's like you said to in the things, one of the questions you keep asking people, have you ever had a day off? And everyone goes, oh God, no. You couldn't. I did. I had to because of my tooth. And I went to the dentist in the morning and sat at the back of the theatre watching my understudy resentful like Norma Desmond. Watching this 19-year-old dancer slip around in Myra's huge costumes. No, I don't.
How did he get on though?
Oh, he was great. He's lovely. I'm still friends with him now, and he still jokes about being my understudy. But it was good to watch, and it was good to see the show actually. And when I went backstage, I was like, well, I have notes for everyone. Being the only member of the cast that has now seen the show, so I don't know why it's looked down on. Maybe it's just because it's hugely commercial, for one. You know, a lot of people. I think sometimes you can smell when someone's been put in a pantomime and they don't know what they're doing. There was a tradition for a while of the new Wimbledon Theatre of putting bewildered Americans into it, wasn't there? So I think Priscilla Presley was one, and who did they have? Someone from Dallas, and who's he with the car? Knight Rider. David Hasselhoff. He did it, didn't he? And it sort of became a tradition of the new Wimbledon theatres that they'd have an American on. And there'd be this American on stage going, I don't know what any of this is. I don't. I've got a friend who I was talking. He's American, and he went, "What are you doing today?" And I went, "Oh, I've got someone coming around interviewing me for a Panto podcast." And he went, "What's Panto?" And I went, "Oh, well, how long you got?" So I don't know. I'd love to know why people look down on Panto.
Do you think it could be jealousy?
I don't think so. I think jealousy is always identified as the cause of any kind of negative feeling. I don't think it is jealousy. Maybe it is. Maybe we'll have to do a census. That would be interesting. But then again, a lot of people look down on drag. You know, I've had playing Myra. I've faced a lot of brick walls over the last 10 years because I shan't mention names, but I've played very well-known comedy nights and had the audience eating out of the palm of my hand, and then at the end being told, oh yeah, and maybe we probably won't book you again, not really our thing, you know. And I'm like, I don't understand what wasn't their thing. But you know, vaudeville sort of end of the pier kind of variety is looked down on a little bit. I think really what comedy wants is a very earnest person in jeans and a t-shirt, not telling jokes so much as rattling off life anecdotes, you know. So I don't know, maybe I'm looking down on comedy there in the same way that comedy looks down on pantomime. I don't know, I could be accused of that.
So what actually started you with Myra?
Oh, so well, I've always been a precocious show off. So I was always in amateur dramatics. I was in The Wind in the Willows. I was in Alice in Wonderland. I played a stoat, and I've always enjoyed theatre. And I was my first ever theatrical show. I was in 1997. I was 10 years old. I was playing Basher Stoat, that well-known stoat, in The Wind in the Willows. I was the Centurion stoat outside Toad Hall that tried to stop Mole from getting in dressed as a washerwoman. So it's my first theatre show, and also my first brushing with drag. But even though I wasn't the one in drag. But so I played this stoat, and I went back. I remember we rehearsed it, and we rehearsed it in the we rehearsed it upstairs in pubs in a way that children probably wouldn't be allowed to now. But we were rehearsing it upstairs in the pubs, and I remember the day of the dress rehearsal, which was the first day we walked into the theatre, and I'd been in the Rotherham Civic Theatre before. I saw my first pantomime at the Rotherham Civic Theatre. I remember, this slight side anecdote, I remember my mum telling me, oh, we're going to the theatre today, we're going to see Alice in Wonderland, and I got there and it was a puppet show and not a pantomime, and I was furious. Because I didn't know that they did other theatre that wasn't a pantomime at this point. So I went backstage on the day of the dress rehearsal for this amateur production of The Wind in the Willows. And I remember just like marvelling at the backstage area, like looking up and seeing the flies and like dressing rooms and there's just like a magic to being backstage. And I think was the guy from Newcastle whose name has evaded me, played
Steve
Hook.
Arnott.
Yeah, because I saw Steve Arnott last year as well, because while I was up north I wanted to see as many pantos as I saw, so I went to go and see the Theatre Royal one, because Simon Bashford, who played Ugly Sister who played the fairy godmother when I was Ugly Sister, Simon Bashford had played Ugly with Chris Hayward years ago, and he talked very fondly of Chris Hayward's Dame, and I went, I must see Chris Hayward's Dame, I must go and see that. And I wanted to see Clive and, is it Webb?
Clive Webb and Danny Adams.
Yeah, Danny Adams, that's it. I must see them too. So I went to go and see the Panto, and anyway, so Steve Arnott said in his interview with you that there's a smell to a theatre, and there absolutely is. And again, the Leeds Carriage Works had it, the Rotherham Civic Theatre had it, every theatre I've ever been. I was working at the Hackney Empire just this weekend, just gone. The Hackney Empire has it. And it doesn't matter whether you were built 10 years ago, whether you're a Frank Matcham build, whether your theatres backstage have a certain aura to them. And I just remember at 10 years old just falling instantly in love with the physical theatre, like the actual building, and that's never left you. And it's the same with loving pantomime. I don't think that ever leaves you. I'm moving slightly on. I'll get back to the. I will put more content in this than just going, Panto's great, isn't it? But I remember going to see Cinderella at London Palladium, and I'm assuming you saw it.
Yes.
And I wept because it was the first time that I saw a pantomime that was as big as I remember it. And I remember going to see the Panto at the Alhambra, and I remember Jack and the Beanstalk with Frank Bruno. I remember the giant he took up the entire stage. And the cloth went up, and there was this giant there, and it was all mechanic and everything. And I remember being astounded by it. But of course, I was knee-high to a grasshopper. I was tiny, so of course, if I saw that same stage, I'd be Alhambra's tiny compared to how I remember it. So when the video started on the gauze, and there was a bleed through, and Amanda Holden came flying out over the audience as the fairy godmother, I just went. I was like, oh, it's like being 6 again. But so I was always a show off. And I enjoyed amateur dramatics. And then I'd always sort of enjoyed any opportunity to be funny. So when we did amateur dramatics, I was always attracted to the characters. And I remember when I did Wind in the Willows, there was a line. As I mentioned, I was the Centurion Stoat outside Toad Hall, and there was a line where I was meant to say, "Oh, Sergeant," because there was me Stoat, and there was a weasel who was Chief Weasel who was giving me orders not to let anyone in. And the line as written was, "Ooh, Sergeant, OOH, Sergeant." And I must have done the biggest Frankie Howard, age 10. I just went, "Oh, Sergeant!" And I remember the room falling about laughing, and I didn't understand why, because I didn't realise how camp had just been. But
the clues were there.
Yeah, oh yeah. But I remember that felt good. I'd done something and they were falling about laughing, and I should do that again. That's how I'll do that line if it makes you laugh. I didn't understand why it made them laugh, but I was like, good, I'll do that. And so I've always leaned toward comedies. Fast forward to 2008, and I'm a university student at Central St Martin's College of Art and Design. And me and my friend went to, I don't know if I should admit this on the podcast, I don't know if this is damaging to future employment opportunities within the pantomime industry, but me and a friend went to a fancy dress party dressed as Myra Hindley and Rose West. So,
well...
the things you do when you're young. So we were, and so we did this, and then after that we referred to each other nicknames as Myra and Rose, and we'd make up stories about what these women were up to the point that they sort of removed themselves from their child-killing counterparts and went on to sort of become characters in their own rights. So I'd see my mate Richie and I'd say, "Oh, what's Rose up to?" And he'd be like, "Oh, she's won a tenner on a scratch card, so she's put it on a caravan holiday in Ingamels. She's gone off with the kids." And I'd be like, "Oh, right, okay." He went, "How's Myra?" And she'd be like, "She's been trying to look at the bingo again, you know." And we came up with these stories about these two women and developed them. And it became very obvious that these women were sisters. It became very obvious that Rose was the one with the family. She was a homebody. She was quite frumpy. Myra was the glamorous, good-time blonde girl that enjoyed singing at karaoke's, you know, things like that. And then I moved to London, and I saw an advert on the internet for an open mic night at Madame Jojo's, which I've mentioned, the burlesque night. Finger in the Pie Cabaret, it was called, ran by Finger in the Pie Theatre. And they were just advertising for 10 minutes. And I went, I wonder if Myra will work on stage. You know, I wonder if this woman I've created will work on stage. And I put her in front of the audience, without sort of sounding immodest, I took the roof off. And I've never stopped since. And I was offered a gig immediately at the London Burlesque Festival that year. And then I was offered, the job of hosting Finger in the Pie Cabaret. And then eventually... the gay bars started to take note because they booked drag acts, and I think I'd worked a bit with the Royal Vauxhall Tavern, which I mentioned is where Savage started, and so they got me to host a night there, and then someone from another venue saw me at that and started. But so then I started to work more frequently on the sort of in the gay bars. But I've never lost that sort of theatre instinct. So rather than when Myra went on stage, she wasn't a man in a dress. She wasn't a bloke. She wasn't there to just sing, ABBA songs and whatever. She'll do it as a character. So she has a way of talking, a way of presenting songs. She the most sort of popular routine that Myra does in her shows is she does a rendition of "I Know Him So Well." And I did this on TV. I was a guest on the John Bishop show in 2015, and I went on and sang Myra's version "I Know Him So Well." And what Myra does is she walks on stage. She explains that she's going to do a song now that means a lot to her because she used to sing it with her sister, who's no longer with us. She's in Doncaster. Cymbal crash, and then. And the music starts, and for the entire first verse of "I Know Him So Well," Myra just sits there and does nothing. And the audience are a bit confused, and they go, "What's going on?" And then Myra just goes into the microphone, "Oh, I don't sing this bit." And so the first half of the song is just dead air of Myra just sitting there and not doing anything. And then she joins in with the second half of the song, and by this point the audience have realised that they should sing the other bits, and it turns into a sort of thing. And I did it on the John Bishop show. And Tim Rice was watching, and Tim Rice tweeted and said, "Thank you to Myra Dubois for that definitive version of "I Know Him So Well." and then so Myra loves that. What
an endorsement!
Yeah, Myra loves that. In her eyes, she is better than Elaine Page. And so she, and then Tim Rice invited Myra to sing it at a private dinner he was hosting for some. I can't remember. I think they're called Sods, and it's some sort of society for songwriters, and they do a lot of fun. I suppose it's like the Water Rats, really, but for songwriters. And they invited me down, so I went to this hotel in Mayfair, or Myra did, tottered down, sang half a song, and she thanked while she was on stage. She thanked Tim Rice for all the wonderful musicals he'd written, like Phantom of the Opera and Cats. I quite like doing that with Myra. I quite like Myra undermining any situation that she's in. There was a wonderful joke that made it. That's what I love about working on pantomimes. Jokes appear. Like you can write jokes, but they'll come to you, And there was one joke where Jack, played by Danny Colligan, went, "Don't worry, I'm going to rid this village of the giant's tyranny forever." And he always punched the air, and there was always the audience never went for it. I don't know why, but the audience always just sat there and watched him and went, "All right, okay." After about the third show of this, I just looked at the audience and went, "He'd get more support from a Primark bra." it was. I just liked undermining the situation. I think it's what I enjoy doing with Myra. But how did we get onto that? What was the question? Just how did I get started with Myra, wasn't it?
Yeah, where did you find your Myra? And what was it like when you put on the wig for the very first time? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. It's for me. For me, Myra's not there until I've got the lipstick on, because Myra's got a very distinctive sneer. She's very she's very snarly and oh god, and so I paint all the face and do the eyebrows, all the everything, all the work, and even put the wig on until I've got the lipstick on. It's not Myra. As soon as the lipstick goes on, there she is, and people always tell me it's very funny to watch me getting ready because I start grimacing at the you can tell when Myra's creeping across the face because the eyebrow will arch slightly, and you can see her manifesting, and I'm always, but that's how I get into character, and I like to warm up, and once I'm in character, probably very annoying for everyone else, I don't drop it. So when I'm backstage and I'm talking to the costume or the stage hands or the children, once I'm Myra. And then when I take it all off as well, I have to really, like a dog shaking off the rain, I've got to really get her off, otherwise I can't, otherwise I forget. And it's funny, I do another character as well called Frank Lavender, and Frank Lavender is he's a little more in development than Myra. I've done 2 Edinburgh Fringes with Frank, and he's an older club comic. And he's struggling to adapt to the current politically correct climate. So he wants to, because one thing, I mean, people you've interviewed have said it. People will complain about political correctness, but then they always follow it up with, "I don't want to offend anyone." There's no comedian, I don't think, that's going on stage that's going to go, "Right, this community are having it." You know what I mean? So Frank is he doesn't want to offend anyone. He's confused that the world has changed around him. So he's trying to tell jokes that he thinks people want to hear. And they're awful. They are really just terrible jokes. But the comedy comes out of Frank's... He has a thing, he's got what he calls his laughter tally. And Frank tallies how many laughs he gets from the audience as the show goes on, and he uses that to measure how well the gig is going. So every so often he'll refer to the laughter tallier and go, "No, what are we on now?" And and it's a thing. And he always gives that job to someone in the audience to do, and he always gives it to a woman first, but then worries that the woman thinks that they've been delegated secretarial work. So then he takes it off them and gives it to a man, but then he worries that he's created a glass ceiling, so he takes it off the man and gives it back to the woman. And it's all that kind of like trying to escape out of quicksand. And I can't remember why I brought Frank up now, but I do the same with Frank. I've got to really shake off the character to get him off. And although it's quite funny because I was in Edinburgh and I was Frank sort of talks like this. He's a northern comic. He's got a very deadpan delivery. And Myra, she's more nasal like this, so Myra talks like this. And I was walking down the street as Frank, and I forgot I was Frank, and someone waved at me, and I just went as Myra, but dressed as Frank, went, "Oh, thank you, love," So you've got to really sort of cling on to your own identity and who you are. So, yeah.
Is there part of that where you're hiding behind it?
I don't think hiding behind it. I mean, certainly, Myra and Frank are... You know how you used to get pictures of rock, and there's sedimentary rock, and there's different kinds of rock, and they are all mined from different seams of rock that are me. So if the rock is Gareth Joyner, Frank is a part of Gareth Joyner, and Myra is a part of Gareth Joyner. But I've got no interest in appearing as myself, and that's not because I'm worried about myself, or I've got, I'm quite happy to come on this podcast as myself, and talk to you, and I happily take acting work as myself. But I just think sometimes you can better address something if you do it through a character. So, for example, Frank and the comedy and PC things, that's because these are my opinions that I have. My opinion is that, look, what happens, no one wants to offend anyone, but if you try and create comedy with the starting point of, right, let's not offend anyone, you will end up with empty comedy. And that's why Frank's jokes are all awful. That's like, look, this is what the lion is like without its teeth. You know what I mean? There's nothing, you know. And me creating a character that performs my point, I think is funnier than me just going on stage and saying that. I think if you go on stage and say that, you just become a ranting person. I'd rather create a character that deals with these things. And the same with Myra. Myra's thing is that she offended someone this weekend. Someone tweeted that they found one of her jokes anti-Semitic, which the joke was that she'd just watched the documentary by Mel Gibson and she didn't know that the Jews killed Jesus. Now, I think it's very clearly signposted in that joke that that's a ridiculous sentiment to hold. Nobody thinks the Jews killed Jesus. Mel Gibson does because he's an idiot, and Myra Dubois has signalled that by saying she watched the Mel Gibson documentary. So she's already signalled that she's not totally engaged with it because it's not a documentary, it's a film. So, you know, but that's... Someone complained that she was anti-Semitic, so Myra went on stage the next day at the same gig and said, "I've been accused of being antiseptic." And it's just a nicer way of dealing with the world. If I went on stage and, like I just did, explained the joke, said why it's, you know, expressed frustration at being accused of being offensive, that's just a person ranting on stage. If I have Myra go on stage and respond to it with a malapropism, then it's funny. So that's why character work interests me. And that's why I made a conscious decision to play the Dame as Myra, because this character already existed. And I considered for a moment, well, why don't you just play the Dame as Gareth, and then you've got the freedom to do what you want with the Dame. For example, Myra's a blonde. She will never not be a blonde. She will always be a blonde. And I went, well, if you want to do the Dame as Gareth, you could choose an auburn wig if you wanted, or but there's just something very funny about Myra in a day. Like, Myra walked out as Dame, even if people have never heard of Myra walked out as Dame Trot, and she had this cow print dress, bloomers, stripy tights, high-heeled shoes, because not boots for Myra, so high-heeled shoes, and she trotted out, and just seeing someone dressed like Baby Jane with bleach blonde hair and a sneer, it just got an instant laugh, you know. So it's just something that works, and it's not a way that I know anyone else is playing Dame at the moment. So I've really enjoyed that. I've really enjoyed finding Myra's Dame.
Do you think you can get away with more with Myra?
I can probably get away with more. I mean, you say, you know, there's certain... I've learnt the rules in the and I abide by the rules. Like, for example, anything that I do in Myra's adult shows doesn't go into the panto. I wouldn't put a joke that could be even thought of as anti-Semitic in a panto, because that's not what we're there for. Myra's there to tell the story. That's the important thing with Panto. They're my favourite Pantos, and this is why I do favour places like the Hackney Empire and the York. The storyline, but the story. I saw the one at the Newcastle Theatre Royal, and the story of Peter Pan took a back seat to the circus acts, which is fine, and it was enjoyable and it was wonderful. But my favourite ones are the ones where the story's good, and this is why I love the one at the York Theatre Royal, because I know Berwick was very dismissive of his own storylines, but you're taking part in a tradition where you're taking these stories that have been around for centuries and you're telling your version of them and passing them on. And it's the first time having Flesh Creep, or the Demon, I don't think it was called Flesh Creep, but having, rather than henchman to the giant, having him as a mad scientist who the giant was an invention of. That's genius. What a clever spin on an old story. And I love seeing things like that in it. So I love when, you know, you see something and they've, again, it's different but the same. I love that. But to answer your question about getting away with more as Myra, you can get away with more as long as it's contained into a physical look, I would say. So, for example, if someone... So in the Dick Whittington we're doing in Hoddesdon, the show's 1 o'clock in the afternoon and 4:30 in the evening. I think there's a couple of 5 and 6 o'clocks, but there's no 7:30 show. It's an early show, and as such, the audiences are going to be very young. There's going to be a lot of children at this. There's not going to be any evening drunk audiences with mums and dads, or the adults, and so there's no innuendo, even though Dick Whittington is ripe for it. because, you know, Dick Whittington, and he has a pussy, and there are seamen in it, and you know, all this thing. None of that sort of stuff that you would have heard at the Palladium over Christmas, because it's just the wrong audience for it. However, I will allow an arched eyebrow. So if someone says, you know, oh, we've been looking for you, Dick, I will do a, you know that kind of thing. I think that's acceptable. A knowing. Yeah. And you've got to know, even though Myra knows she's in a pantomime, she's on the audience's side. She can't. I went out when I played Ugly Sister, there was we had an opening section where me and Stephen looked for a fella in the audience. And so the lights came down and an air raid siren sounded, and we pulled these huge, powerful torches out of our handbags, and we crossed beams all over the audience, you know. And then the house lights went back up, and then what we did is we basically went into the audience and were mean to the audience for a bit. And there was one line that I always said, where I always said it, directed it at a woman, and I always said something like, "Look at you in your blouse. Don't worry, love. Not everyone dresses up for the theatre." And it always got a good laugh as an Ugly Sister. And I did it as Dame Trot, nothing, lead balloon. And I just went, oh no, she shouldn't, she's on their side, she's not there. But if it's a man, they're fair game. Say what you want to a fella, especially if it's a teacher with a school party. Goodness me, just paint a target on their heads and go for them. And I enjoyed doing that. And I picked a fella at the beginning of the show, and he was referred to constantly throughout the entire thing. And then at the end of the show, when the king proposed to Dame Trot, she accepted, but not until she'd left Dave down on the front row, you know, that kind of. So that was kind of nice, and I enjoy doing that. So she gets that messing with the audience and using that skill that I've cultivated, that crowd works, because I'm very, you know, not to toot me own horn, but I'm very good at crowd work. You know, I'm very good at talking to an audience and making them feel comfortable and stuff. So, you know, I'd probably get away with a bit more of that than some dames maybe do.
Was it daunting leaving a predominantly gay audience to go to a family audience?
Not really, because I've been doing the Edinburgh Fringe, and I've been doing I've worked to. Oh, my tea's cold. I just took a slurp of tea to explain why that statement came from. Sorry, listeners at home. No, because, I mean, gay audiences are audiences, straight audiences are audiences, you know. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily, for example, we had Paul Ross as the ghost in the adult panto because that news was going around that Paul Ross had been caught having an affair with a man. So, of course, there's a gay slant on that storyline, which is what the gay audiences found funny, you know. You wouldn't put that in a mainstream panto, not even an adult mainstream panto, I don't think. I think that would be too niche a reference. But again, that goes into pantos being about the community that they're for, whether that's the gay community or York as a community. You know, there are jokes in York that wouldn't land in Hackney because York is York and Hackney is Hackney. So it wasn't hard. You just know who you're playing to. But I was at a great advantage in Leeds because I'm from Yorkshire myself, so I'm from Rotherham, which is just down the road from Leeds. So I understand, you know, I understand local humour. I understand what people find funny in that part of the world. I know what Bradford means to Leeds. I know, you know, Myra's got a big Manchester fan base, and a busload of them came to see the show in Manchester. And straight away, I was straight on it. I was like, guess what, everyone? We've got Lancastrians in. You know what I mean? It's just knowing that, you just know your audience. And when I go to, you know, Hoddesdon, it'll be the same thing. I've already started, I've not even seen the audiences yet, but I've already told you they're going to be young, they're going to be, that you know, you tailored the show to them because of that. And because they're so young, that's why I suggested to Nick, I was like, we need Baby Shark for the ghost gag. As soon as they hear Baby Shark, they'll go mad for it because it's what the kids love. But that's what I learned from Jez. Jez was like, oh, spend the year, find out what they're into, find out what they're watching, keep an ear to the ground. Because there was a joke in it that when I went to Jack offers himself to go and fight the giant, and the king says, are you brave enough? And Dame Trot steps in very defensively, and the line was, brave, he can watch Bake Off without screaming. And I was like, hey, that don't make sense. Bake Off? What? Why Bake Off? So I said, what should I say instead of Bake Off? And Jez went, say Paw Patrol. And I was like, why? No, just trust me, say Paw Patrol. Why? That doesn't make sense either. Just say it, trust me. So I did, I said it. They absolutely died with laughter. just the mention of Paw Patrol, this program they like, I was like, oh, fair enough then. So I've spent the year sort of, trying to be...
How do you conduct your research like that?
Just keep an ear out when you're going around, see what kids are playing with, see what shops are selling. Fidget spinners have given way to squishes. So, and when I was little, it was yo-yos and pogs and tazos. So, it's just keep an eye open, keep an ear out. And also, I mean, you know what the finale song is. I mean, what's nice about being a dame, I would say, is that there is a little dame network that you get brought into, and you're all friendly with each other. I'm still very good friends with Simon Bashford. We keep in regular contact. He was a great supporter of me, actually. He did a lot of telling Paul Holman that you've got to give Gareth a dame. He'd be a great dame, and so we're still good friends. I'm very good friends with JP McHugh, who is known as Mary Mack on the drag circuit, and he does the Leamington Spa Panto. He writes it as well. He's doing Dick Whittington this year, and but we all talk to each other, and in sort of like March sort of time, you're all nodding at each other, going, we're all spending this Christmas singing This Is Me, aren't we? And the scripts have just landed, and sure as you can be, there it is, This Is Me. We're all finishing with it. So you just know. You stay clued into the climate, and I think that's really good. And think times are changing. I did want to talk about this as well, because pantomime changes with the times, and it's changing now. And one thing I've got an eye on is Aladdin and the treatment of Aladdin, because with more and more people talking about cultural appropriation, Orientalism. I've not said that right, but
You know what you mean,
yeah, you know what I mean. There has started to be some sensitivity towards the Aladdin story. And I think there's I can't remember the name of the theatre. You might have to fact check this, or maybe listeners at home can Google it. But there was a theatre that put up auditions for PC Ping and PC Pong, and they were told that these were racist names. And so the theatre changed the names of these two policemen. And I, probably contrary to some opinions that you will come across, I think this is a good thing. I think pantomime will change, and it will continue to change, and the old guard will always complain that it will never be the same. I mean, when Grimaldi died, there were newspaper articles stating that pantomime was dead. Political correctness won't kill pantomime. It'll adapt to it. And if people start to feel uncomfortable at names like PC, Ping and Pong, because we've become increasingly aware of racial sensitivity, then the policeman will be called something else, and that's fine. When I'm writing a current adult panto for a venue, I'm not allowed to say what it is yet, but I'm writing another adult panto, and so again, to respond to this, I've written in the policeman PC no offence, and he's going around the panto blowing whistles on any jokes that might be deemed offensive. And this, this is, you incorporate it in. You don't just complain and say, oh, you can't say anything nowadays, can you? Because Billy Pearce was talking in your podcast, and he said, and I mean this with respect as well, he was saying that he got slapped on the wrist for saying mums and dads, and because not everyone has a mum and a dad. And I grew up without a dad, and I remember going to the pantomime and hearing mums and dads, and I remember feeling terrible because I didn't have a dad. So Billy Pearce taking that consideration will mean, someone might think, oh, that's going too far, you know what you mean when you say mums and dads. It's like, no, to a kid that means a lot. And there was a joke in Cinderella that I didn't like and I had taken out. There was a reference to Aladdin, and someone said, come out the lamp, here I am, big puff. And I went, no, there's going to be gay kids in that audience. There's going to be gay kids in the audience, and they'll hear that. And there'll be straight kids in the audience that think it's okay to go around calling people that. And you don't hear an equivalent to that word being used for any other minority. You wouldn't use that to describe. You wouldn't use any of the slurs that there are for black people in a panto. So that shouldn't be there, And it will. And I'll probably be too politically correct for some people's taste, but I think that's it's children's first theatre. You've got to reflect the moods of the time, and panto is changing, and I think it's fascinating. And some people have responded with Aladdin by not setting it in China at all. So. The Hammersmith the Hammersmith lyric, they didn't tell you where they were. Everything was Aladdin, they had palm trees in a desert and, you know, a temple and stuff, but it was just, you were just somewhere, you know, and fascinating. I don't know if it's right or if it's wrong or what will happen, but I think it's really interesting. It fascinates me.
And then there's been the thing recently where they've said that the heroine, where the girl always needs saved by the man.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Again, Panto is changing, right? And I will go from the... Listen, I'm a gay man, and every time I go to a pantomime, I have to see a man and a woman fall in love. Not have to see, like I'm terribly offended by that. I'm not terribly offended by that. But we live in a country now where gay marriage is legal. And Stephen Fry wrote a gay character into his pantomime when he did Cinderella at the Old Vic, that I think Dandini was gay, openly so, and not just as a punchline. You know, he was just a gay character, and things like that will happen, and I think it's good. I mean, I saw Sleeping Beauty at the Hackney Empire, and Beauty herself slayed the dragon, and that was fine. It didn't diminish the story, and people seem to be very defensive of these stories. But what they're ignoring is that these stories are constantly evolving organisms anyway. Like, people complain that Disney sanitized Cinderella. Disney didn't sanitize Cinderella. Disney based their Cinderella on a version of Cinderella that already existed, where the Ugly Sisters don't dance on hot coals at the end. You know, people they survive and exist. There's like versions of Cinderella with a talking tree instead of a fairy godmother. You know, and yeah, they are. If in a version of Sleeping Beauty, and Beauty kills the dragon, if that's the message that sends to the little girls in the audience, is an important one. It doesn't mean that I rubbish. It doesn't mean that if I see a pantomime where the prince slays the dragon, I'm going to be like, that's wrong. That should be. I'm writing a letter. I just think there is room for all of this, and this is why I love going to different pantos, and this is why I go to the independent pantos. I love going to the Hackney Empire to see what they're doing, and I love going. And this year, I'm going to try my very, very hardest to see the Tower pantomime in Blackpool. Have you ever been to that one?
No.
They do a pantomime in the Tower Circus, and I'd love to see how they do it. It's a circus ring. It's in the round. How do they present a pantomime? So I'm going to try and see that and see what they do. But, you know, again, you can't please everyone. I mean, everything I just said will be too politically correct for some people listening to this, and yet I got called anti-Semitic over the weekend. So do you know what I mean? You can't please everyone. Jokes are going to offend people, and that's my viewpoint on it. But I do, and I love that in pantomime, everything's reversed. The rules don't matter. And so Dave Benson Phillips is playing my son this year, and Dave Benson Phillips is a 53-year-old black man, and I'm a 31-year-old white man, but I'm his mother, and that won't be questioned, and that will be the facts, and there will be people watching in the audience, even if it's just on a subliminal level, going, oh, they're different colours, but they're still family. You know what I mean? It's nice, and I think that pantomime can be incredibly powerful because it has that potential. I think, again, I'm probably over-intellectualising.
Do you think, though, there should be new stories being written?
There's always new stories being written. One of the things you've got to remember is that for a lot of the audience, that is a new story. Like, Cinderella is new to them. I remember when we were doing Cinderella, there was a moment. Matthew Ashford. I loved Matthew Ashford's way of directing it, because he let the comedy be the comedy, but there was key scenes that he treated like Pinter, and the ticket tear. When we did the ticket tear, goodness me, it was, oh my god, it was traumatizing. We gave out numbers for helplines after the ticket tear scene. It was because we that is the point where the assistants are malevolent evil. That, you know, they're not looking for a fella. They're not being a bit all, you know, boob nudgy. They're evil. And the audience their heart needs to go out to Cinderella. It's got to. And the other scene was when the slipper fit, and we were all on stage, and we just I asked if I could have the long stocking. I've always wanted to do the long stocking, so I was like, can I have the stocking? And gave Lola the leg. And so we did that. You know, we'd done that bit with the two sisters, and the slipper didn't fit. And then it got to Cinderella's turn, and everyone on stage was looking at the thing, and all the lighting was on Cinderella's foot, and the slipper went on the foot. And Dandini, who was doing the slipper fitting, Dandini just went, it fits. like that. He just delivered it like not it fits. So he just went it fits, and every show without fail, the audience gasped, and like kids were going. And it just occurred to me, I was like, they didn't know that the slipper was going to fit. You take it for granted that Cinderella's slipper is going to fit because you know the story, and they don't know. And I think that was really, really beautiful. I mean, new stories are being written all the time, and you know, it's a gradual process. I mean, Peter Pan is now accepted as a pantomime. That's within my lifetime. That I remember, you know, I'm still hesitant. And new titles. Yeah, no, Peter Pan has become like an accepted panto within my lifetime. I certainly remember when I was very little, you never got any productions of it. And then I remember they did one production of it somewhere with the Chuckle... Was it the Juggle Brothers? I can't remember. It was at the Alhambra anyway, and we didn't go that year. And I remember being like, Peter Pan's not a pantomime. I've seen, you know. And that has been my feeling until very recently. I actually wrote an adult version of Peter Pan called Peter Pan Sexual, in which Peter Pan was a polyamorous sex pest. That was great fun, and Myra was Hook in that one, which was it was great. I don't know if you saw. They did a production of Peter Pan at the National Theatre where Hook was played by Mrs. Darling, so Hook was a woman, and it's fantastic. The dialogue really takes on a new tone when you make the mum the villain, because the original title for Peter, I love Peter Pan. If you look up on that shelf there, I've got about 4 or 5 copies, including the original play. I've got a version illustrated by Mabel Lucy Atwell. I've got a version of Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens illustrated by Arthur Rackham. I love Peter Pan, but it's never struck me as a pantomime, and I don't think I've seen a pantomime version of it that I'm happy with. So, for example, I saw the Theatre Royal one in Newcastle. Fantastic show, wonderfully entertaining. Didn't tell the story of Peter Pan, which is fine. It was entertaining. It was wonderful. I had a great time. The families enjoyed themselves. But like, I'm yet to see Peter Pan as a pantomime and going, oh, that was what I want. But you know, I think there's a few productions this year that I want to go and see. But yeah, and also Snow White, after the Disney film, that became a panto, didn't it? And that's now accepted as one of the big titles that you see all the time. I don't know really. I don't know what the next ones will be, but it will be something influenced by film. People will sneer and say that this is Disney's influence. You know, Disney have too much an influence over it, but suggestions have to come from somewhere. Apparently, we only have Aladdin as a pantomime because the king at the time, I want to say George, but or was it not Victoria? Maybe before Victoria. No, I don't know, but apparently we only have Aladdin as a pantomime because a monarch at the time was very into the Far East, and so the Theatre Royal Drury Lane did Aladdin to appease this monarch. Whether or not that's true or not, I don't know. I read that somewhere in my reading up of pantomime. But, so, you know, the decisions to make something a pantomime have to come from somewhere. Mother Goose she's taken a little revival, hasn't she? Which is unexpected because there's been no Disney film, there's been no Netflix original series based on Mother Goose. And that's wonderful. I'd love to eventually, I mean, like, you know, like I say, I'm sort of speaking to you 3 years into my pantomime career, so I don't know what the future holds, but I would love to get into a position where I can write mainstream pantomimes, because I love writing comedy. It's one of the things I truly love. And I'd love to write a version of Mother Goose for Myra. That is because she is a vain woman. She is. And I think it would suit her brilliantly. I would love to write. And that has taken... I think the Hackney Empire gave the green light on Mother Goose. I think they did their version with Clive Rowe. And then that won an Olivier. And a Panto winning an Olivier was big. And I think that gave... I mean, it's about ticket sales, isn't it? It's about what sells. There's a lot of... Robinson Crusoe's made a little reappearance because of the Pirates of the Caribbean being popular. Dick Whittington has taken on more of a nautical... You know, if you see the artwork for Dick Whittington now is all boats and ships and pirates rather than bells and hills and knapsacks, you know. So that's because pirates sell, and it's what puts bums on seats. I mean, I'm doing Dick Whittington with PHA, And they didn't do Dick Whittington for the longest time. They did it last year in Lytham St Anne's with Simmons and Simmons. It's their script that we're using. So Dick Whittington maybe. But again, the Palladium gave the green light on that one. I know a lot of people are doing Dick Whittington this year. JP McHugh in Leamington, they're doing Dick Whittington. Although he's done you know what I said, I like when people do a different twist on something familiar. Hang on, my dog's in the way. Sorry, Vera, move. So JP McHugh last year did Beauty and the Beast, and he was playing the cook, and so they're doing Dick Whittington this year. And usually the dame in Dick Whittington is Sarah the cook, but Mary Mac said, "Oh, we did cook last year. She's a fishmonger." So this year the dame in Leamington Spa is a fishmonger. I think that's wonderful. Wonderful fun, because it's sort of a relative of a cook. It's she's not a plasterer. She's not completely changed the vocation, but it's a relative of. So I don't know. I wonder. It depends what the output is. I mean, there was a Jack and the Beanstalk film not long ago, but I think it panned. I don't think it did very well, so there wasn't much of a following impact. We're getting the Aladdin film. They're remaking Aladdin, so I wonder if that'll. Occasionally you do get a couple of Aladdins that are set in Arabia, don't you, rather than China, which is.
But then again, you got the West End show, haven't you? Which is closing, unfortunately.
Have you seen it?
Yes.
It is such a pantomime, isn't it?
It is.
And it's trying so hard not to be a pantomime. I tell you how hard they're trying for it not to be a pantomime. Jafar always enters from the right. That's like, just because you've switched it, love, it doesn't mean.
The good old Panto tradition. And I'm looking up on your shelves there. You've got, obviously, the lamp.
I've got an Aladdin lamp there, yeah. I've never played Twanky. I'd love to. She's my favourite dame. I really... Twanky and Mother Goose are the two I'd like to do. And I did play Twanky in an adult pantomime in a lesin, which was a lesbian take on the Aladdin mythology. And I won't give away the jokes from it, because this is, you don't know who's listening to a podcast about pantos. So, but I played Twanky in that, and that was fun to do. So I'd love to do her in a mainstream panto, because, like I say, I've already got all the jokes written down. That was great. So yeah, why did I bring that up? Because you pointed out my lamp. That was just in Primark, that Aladdin's
Was
lamp.
it? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
It's actually a teapot.
Looks good, though.
Yeah, it does look good. If you look around...
Better than some of the props that you see at some pantos.
I've
No
seen
offence to anybody.
Aladdin and his wonderful sequined watering can. What's that? But no, I've got I mean, if you look up at the top as well, there's Captain Hook with the Snow White's stepmother and Maleficent and Cruella de Vil. I've got a couple of books on pantomime over there as well. There's a book on Grimaldi that's very good that I recommend, and oh yes, it is a history of panto. There's panto motifs. That wardrobe to the extras. That's all costumes. That actually there pressed up against the glass. That's the zebra print belly dancing costume I told you about. Ready for Morocco.
So I do notice up there, you've got some magic tricks.
I do have magic tricks.
What's that all about?
So I love magic. I absolutely adore it. As I went to go, and I'm really looking forward to seeing Pete Furman in Wimbledon, because, like I said, we've got the same agent, and so I went to see his show in Edinburgh, and it was just brilliant, just wonderful, straight, plain, no frills comedy. I mean, plenty of frills. He's a magician. He's got all these props, but it is just very, very funny comedy. And he actually played. He played Muddles opposite Jason Sutton's Dame, and Jason Sutton is a good friend of mine, as I know Sutton from the drag circuit. He works as Miss Jason. So I love magic, and I think as far as I'm concerned, magicians are acrobats. They're acrobats that work with their fingers. I just think it's the most joyous thing. But sadly, I'm terrible at it, because the benefit of this podcast is that your listeners can't see the pink stumps of flesh that I call hands. They're not. They're like pig's trotters. I've got hands like a Cabbage Patch doll. So they're not the hands that you want to do magic with. So I've tried it as well. I bought myself some chop cups and had a little go at that. No, nothing, can't. So my response to that was to to have Myra do magic. So Myra does Anti-Myra's Fun Show, which is when Myra goes around performing at children's birthday parties. And I took the show to Edinburgh in 2012, and that's where the magic tricks come from. So I've got a die box up there where you make a die vanish, not a dice, that's plural. Make a die vanish, and I've got an arm guillotine. They're all up there in boxes and things like that, and all. So I love magic. I mean, maybe one day there'll be an opportunity to incorporate that into a pantomime. But I do always love, and I really love the sort of Tommy Cooper end of magic as well. Really wonderful. I heard there's a magician called Paul de Beck, so he said it, not me. So if this is liable and the estate of Tommy Cooper are going to come after me, go for Paul de Beck, he said it. But apparently it's a complete myth that Tommy Cooper was a wonderful magician, and apparently he was really awful. And they were like, no, it famed within the magic circle for being a terrible magician.
Not going to lie, I've heard that as well.
But I think that's wonderful, because it's not about the magic, it's about the presentation, you know. So I love magic, all things like that. I've always loved the circus. I went to go recently. I worked in Blackpool, and while I was there, I went to go and see the Tower Circus for the first time, as I mentioned. Have you been to the Tower Circus?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a beautiful building. Frank Masham designed, again, I didn't know. And it's all these wonderful tiles, and you can tell that he'd there's a definite Islamic influence there, because it's all these wonderful geometric shapes in the tiles, and it's absolutely beautiful. And I watched, and I saw the circus, and there was so much panto in it. Like the clown at the Blackpool Tower, Mookie, he did there was righto, he's standing on my righto, and all that the kind of things. And they did the mirror routine, you know, where you're wearing the same costume through the mirror. They did all of that, so I'd love to go and see their panto, see what they do with it. It was very good. But I've always loved the circus. I've always loved clowns. I've always seen. I'm actually a paid up member of Clowns International, because I would consider myself to be a clown before I ever would a drag queen. I hate the phrase drag queen. I just, it's artless. Is in my arrogant opinion, the phrase drag queen, because it's just a man in a frock. What's the next thing then? So I've always thought, like, you know, you go to, I mean, you know, maybe I'm standing on the brink of offending people now, but you go to a pub and there's someone on stage and it's a bloke in a frock and they're just singing Sweet Carolina. That's not entertainment. That's babysitting drunks. You know, and so I prefer to think of myself in terms of a comedian or a clown, and I see more in common with what I do, like in, you know, I'll watch, you know, like I said before, I can communicate to the audience with my face. That's through watching silent comedians. That's watching, you know, I used to mainline on Charlie Chaplin when I was little. I remember BBC Two had a series they're like where for like 6 weeks they showed Chaplin films at midnight, and I stayed up to watch them, like, you know, cross-legged on the carpet, just watching this wonderful comedian. So that's always been the stuff that I've really been into. And so the fact that Myra is played by a man is of no consequence to me. No one mentions Frank Lavender being played by a man, and as far as I'm concerned, it's just an actor playing a role. One's a woman, one's a man. So
would you class it as female impersonation?
You can do, but that to me is a certain that's its own,
because I'm trying
art.
To kind of
Yeah.
work out the wording now, how I say.
Well, you see, no, I mean, I don't. It's not.
It's not like a category. Not like I'm trying to put your act into a category at all.
No, people do like to navigate through what they're relatable. My rule with it, with Myra, is that at the level of press and performance, then it's Myra. She's a woman. She's a character. She's a person. And, you know, and when we talked about this podcast, I was like, shall I set up the interview with Myra? Shall I tell him to meet me in some cafe somewhere and turn up in the full regalia, conduct the interview as Myra? But then I thought, no, because we're probably going to want to talk about the nuts and bolts and the craft of it, you know. And Myra, as far as Myra's concerned, I did a section in the Edinburgh show where she talks about reclaiming pantomime dame roles for older women. So that's Myra's. Myra thinks that she thinks that her playing a pantomime dame is the same as Glenda Jackson playing, you know, King Lear at the Old Vic. So she thinks it's in the same.
Maybe a video diary.
Maybe that would be a video diary of Myra
during
run.
the Panto.
Yeah, because
during the run.
People do want online contact, don't they? But you can't sense people like when people come and review Myra, they always say, "Oh, drag queen Myra Dubois." You can't write to every publication and go, "Oh, actually, I think you'll find," because people navigate the world through terminology they're familiar with, you know. So.
But what about classics, though? So people
Well-
like Hinge and Bracket you mentioned earlier on.
Well, Hinge and Bracket are very much what I do in the way that they're playing a character. Mrs. Shufflewick, she's very much what I do in that she's playing a character. Lily Savage is what I do because it's playing a character. Dame Edna Everage is playing a character. But Danny LaRue, he's not playing a character. He always went to great pains to say, "No, I'm Danny." That's why he always started, "What's your mates?" You know, and he always said, "I'm a comic in a frock, and I'm a bloke in a frock, and I'm a man in a frock." I mean, I don't think he liked the term drag queen either. I think he did prefer female impersonator. I got this. I'm gonna have to describe it to the listeners. But we did a Secret Santa. I'll say this when I come over. We did a Secret Santa with Jack and the Beanstalk, and this was my present. It was it's a programme. Danny LaRue at the Palace with Roy Hood.
Oh,
Isn't that wonderful? And that was especially nice to get because, as I mentioned, Max Hood was our company manager.
Programme 1 shilling.
Yeah. And it's wonderful. And it's from Danny LaRue's famous run at the... And what I love is the restaurant menus printed inside it with all the prices and everything. And look, there's Roy Hood.
Oh, wonderful. But do you think Danny paved the way?
Possibly. I mean, there's examples of drag before Danny LaRue, but they were... I think there was Norman Evans with Over the Garden Wall. Was it Fanny Sidebottom or Fanny Fairbottom she was called? But you know the routine, I mean, don't you? The routine over the wall. And that was popular. And of course, the other way around, there's, you know, Vesta Tilly, who was the male impersonator from the music halls. I think Danny was the first in that he was part of... There was a huge... I'll put this here. I'll fiddle with the cellophane when we're not recording. There was a huge wave of sort of... There was a cultural shift in the 60s, and Peter Cook was a part of it. Lionel Bart was a part of it, and Danny LaRue was a part of it. And I think he was certainly a flag waver of his generation for drag and female impersonation, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, I never deny that Myra's a drag performance. You know, Dame Edna Everage is a drag performance. It's a performance of drag. But it's not a... She, you know, like Dame Edna, Myra doesn't know that there's a man underneath. So... I don't know what the implications are there. Maybe this needs a good psychologist to unpick it all. Maybe
I'm not the man for the job on that one. But have a lay down, right? We'll talk.
But there are people, like I said, there are people who complain to this day about Danny's Dame that said it was too glamorous. And like, why can't you have a glamorous Dame? For every man in a pair of boots, why can't you have a glamorous Dame? Of course you can have a glamorous Dame. I mean, Elaine C. Smith is doing wonderful as a woman Dame. Like, you know, you can do it however you want. I would love to see a return. Because, I mean, put that out there so I don't get coffee on it. I would love to see a return of the female principal boy. Again, the Hackney Empire. I've spent far too much time talking about a panto I've never been in, but the Hackney Empire. They had a girl playing Jack when I went to see it, and that was about 2-3 years ago. And I love seeing female principal boys, and I'd love seeing a woman play Dame. I believe not that I ever saw it, but I believe Kathy Staff played Dame, and why not? You know. Why not? I'd love to see more, but I'd love to see more girls playing principal boys. I'd like to see it edged around a bit. One of the things you risk, when we did Cinderella, it was a wonderful production, thoroughly enjoyed it, had 2 Shetland ponies in it. I was absolutely delighted that we had real horses in it. There was one particular show where they were called Sherry and Diva, and one of them was a diva. She was always kicking off, so we had to have a stagehand go on with this horse in the end and hold on to her so she wouldn't go anywhere. So we put a stagehand in a white coat and a pointy hat, and he took her on for the transformation scene. And just before she went on stage, she did a massive crap in the wings. And then that very same performance before the walk down, Neil Wheatley was doing the song sheet out front, and a little girl weed herself on the stage, and I thought, the magic never ends, does it?
There goes the old adage, never work with children and animals.
Yeah, both in one. Oh dear.
Any particular favourite moments of pantomime for you? I know it's only been 3 years, but...
Well, I mean, already, so there was one moment in... I'd love to do the song sheet one day. It's always given to the comic and not the dame. I understand, but I'd love to have a go at it. But there was one moment, not because of this, because this is terribly sad what I'm about to say, but there was one moment where the song sheet, Jez Edwards had a girl on stage and said, "Oh, what do you want for Christmas?" And she went, "I want my mummy back." And her mum had just died, and oh my God, you could like the mood in the theatre when and then the family wrote to say how touched they were that it was first time they'd been out as a family. And a friend of mine actually, came to see the Panto, and he brought his friends and their 3 children, and he said, "Oh, could you get them up for the song sheet? Would you mind?" I said, "Yeah, Jez doesn't mind. It saves the front of our staff having to pick kids, so I'll see what I can do." So I spoke to Jez, and it was all fine. So they got these 3 kids to go up for the song sheet, and they said, "What's your name?" And he asked the 3 of them their name, and they all had the same surname, obviously. And then afterwards, I went for pizza with them. And the mum and dad said that actually one of the children is adopted, and that was the first time that they'd heard their family name all be used with all 3 of them. Isn't that lovely? Isn't that lovely? So that's when anyone's sneery about pantomime or anything, I'm always like, you haven't got a clue, mate. You know what I mean? It can be a tremendous force for good. So there was those ones. There was when John Lyons, I hope I'm saying his name right. I think it is John Lyons from A Touch of Frost, playing Byron Hardup, said bugger on stage during the ghost bedroom in front of a school children performance. And then said, "I'm sorry if anyone heard that." And Buttons went, "You've got a microphone on, everyone." That was very funny. It's weird though, you get in the middle of a panto run, you enter into this there's a bit of a habit of panto performers of putting the flyer on the mirror and striking off each performance as you get through it, and I'm sure that is the only sort of portal to reality that you have. That's the only thing you can grip to you don't know what day it is, what time of the day it is, what's happened in the news, you don't know who the Prime Minister is, you just enter into this sort of like tunnel world of I feel I'm trying to think of more stories now. I'm sure they'll come. But what I enjoyed about doing Dame as I've been doing it, it was having repartee with a bloke on the front row, and there was one guy who, I said at the end of the show, I went over to let him down before I accepted the King's proposal, and I went over to let this gentleman down who just happened to have a hair of African sunset, we shall say, he was ginger, and he, I went over to let him down. And he went, "No, I didn't want you anyway." So I spat back, "I wouldn't lower myself to a ginger." And that was funny. It's nice to have the freedom to do that a little bit. And I started to get, this sounds woefully unprofessional. It was never to the detriment of the show, but I took great pleasure in making the dancer's corpse. Well, it's the old adage, isn't it? If you can make the orchestra laugh, you're doing it right, because they see the show, they know the show, and you've got to keep it fresh for yourself. Otherwise, you're just parroting lines, and so it's good to put jokes in and pull jokes out, because even though it's the first time that audience has seen the show, you've still got to make it fizz and often put in a new joke in. And there was a scene where I came on and I'd been looking for Jack, and I'm supposed to be looking for him amongst all the villagers, of which we had a total of 4 on stage. That was always an opportunity to make them laugh. And there was once when an extra touched me, so I pointed out, I looked into the wings and went, "This extra just touched me," and started the scene again. But it was always funny. It's never self-indulgent. It's always got to be. It's the audience, and you know if you've lost them, and I never have yet. Hopefully, in 3 years.
It's come to that time.
Oh right.
I hope you've done your research.
I've had a think.
You've had a think.
I've had a think.
The Dream Panto, Alive or Dead, favourite production. Would you want to be on stage, or would you want to be in the audience? Venue?
Well, I've already said that I'd like to write a Mother Goose for Myra. So I'd like to write a Mother Goose for Myra, and I'll just say that as that's the one with me on stage, and I won't cast it any further. So that's one dream panto, Mother Goose for Myra. Don't care which theatre, as long as it. What I would really love to happen is that I would meet a theatre and strike up the relationship where I can work there year after year, because I love working with the team, and that's what I do with my shows, and it's what I did with the adult pantos. I also want to do an adult panto on a bigger scale. You know, in like right instead of in a pub, I want to do it in a theatre to a wider audience. But a dream panto cast, I think, would have to have Les Dawson as Dame. I love Les Dawson. I've got a lot of Les Dawson's books actually. I think he's wonderful, and I bet it must have been a marvel to see him play Dame. I never did, because I was very young when he passed away. So Les Dawson as a Dame, as the fairy. What's she called? Hang on, I've got to get a book by her. You can edit all this down. Jean Ferguson, who plays Marina in from Last of the Summer Wine. She wrote this book about Hilda Baker, who also would have... Hilda Baker, I bet she'd have made a marvellous Dame if she ever played it, or Fairy. I'd quite like my little Frank Lavender to play Baron Hardup one day. That would be quite fun, I think, if I'm allowed to have a year off the skirts. I'd like to see Roy Hood play comic. I know he played Dame recently. I didn't get to see it. Did you see it? No. Roy Hood played Dame at the Brick... where was it? Wilton's Music Hall.
No, I never got to see that.
No, I didn't. I bet it was wonderful. But I'd like to see him appear in Panto. I suppose I'd just like to see everyone in Panto that I won't get to. So maybe that's why I'm doing a lot of grave digging. Not that the Roy Hood's dead, but, you know, very... He doesn't play comic anymore, is what I meant by that. Who else? I should have really written a list for this. I knew this question was coming and I didn't write a list.
Well, favourite panto?
My favourite panto. I couldn't choose one. I love Aladdin. My favourite panto tends to be the panto I've just seen. So if I was to see Aladdin, I'd be like, oh, Aladdin's my favourite. But Aladdin does tend to be my favourite because there's a lot of magic in Aladdin. And I love magic in a pantomime. Dick Whittington is slightly lacking on the magic. The magic is sort of crowbarred in, you know, with the bells. But I do love magic. So Cinderella and Aladdin are probably my favourite too. I mean, when I was doing Cinderella, there wasn't a performance where I didn't watch that transformation scene from The Wings. I made sure I was there, probably to the annoyance of many stagehands, I dare say. I was probably right in the way. But, I always made sure I was in The Wings and I watched it, because it never stops being magic. And, you know, I went to go and see it at the Wimbledon Theatre that same year we were doing it. And that was when First Family were doing it. And, you know, they probably spent more on their front cloth than we did on our set. But it was the same. It's the magic of it. It's, you know, and every time when the overture starts up, I always get a little tingle down my spine. And I always make sure I watch the opening number, because you know what kind of a house you've got from the reception the opening number gets. So if they burst into spontaneous applause, you think, oh, we're in for a good one here. Because even, you know, the audiences change usually. If it's like a 2:00 children's show or an evening show or a relaxed performance, they need their own considerations. And so the end of the first song, why did I get onto this? You just asked me what my favourite panto was and I just started rattling on.
It's a meandering. It's a
meandering one,
isn't it?
Jesus, I need stabilisers. Can you get stabilisers for your mind? I should get a pair. Like, if I had to, favourite panto would probably be Aladdin. But then again, I love Mother Goose as well. I don't know. I do apologise. That should be... Charlie Chaplin would have been marvellous in pantomime, wouldn't he? Did he ever do panto? He did when he was very little. I think he played a skin part. I think he played the skin parts when he was little. I might be making that up. Something to Google. Something for your listeners to research. We'll do a pop quiz at the end of the series.
There you go. That's something for the new year, isn't it? A nice panto quiz.
Panto quiz, yeah. Ooh, there's a thing.
Right. We're gonna
have to round it up there. I'll just waffle on more.
No, go for it. If you want to talk, if you want to talk some more about your dream panto, honestly.
No, I'm trying to think of some more cast.
And what about venue?
I love the Hackney Empire. I've spoken about the Hackney Empire so much, but I was there just this weekend in a show, Johnny Woo's on Royal Variety, which is like a sort of alternative Royal Variety, and it's just beautiful. It's when they made theatres then, they knew what they were doing. There's not a bad seat in the house. Excellent sight lines from all over the place. It's opulent. It's it's an occasion. You've gone out. You're at the theatre and it's a grand palace of, rather than some of these more modern theatres. I'm a bit young to be complaining about these bloody new ones they build, aren't I? But it's certainly you can't beat it. And the Hackney Empire is one of the best, and that's a Frank Matcham. And it's when you're in a Frank Matcham, you can just tell. You feel it. You go, oh, this is a Matcham. So I'd love to play the Hackney Empire because of the physicality of the entire building, and I love their panto. I'd love to play the Sheffield Lyceum because I just love... it was a theatre that meant a lot to me as a child, and it's beautifully designed. Another Frank Matcham, I think. And everyone wants to play the Palladium, don't they? Even Vera wants to play the Palladium, and she's only a dog. Any beautiful theatre. God, I can only give you the vaguest of answers, can't I?
Well, Gareth, thank you so much for being part of the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me on. It's a wonderful thing you've created. I'm glad it exists.
Thank you.
The Panto Podcast.